Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World, I suppose. I thought I would hop on a Friday morning. There's something interesting I want to share with you, which is the State of LLMs report. It was published by Streamlit earlier this month, and it basically looks at all of the activity that's happened on Streamlit over 2023. And it looks at the trends around large language model design and development. And so I'm going to get into that in a moment. It's also an opportunity for me to just make sure that all of this streaming stuff is working. This is the first broadcast I've done from this studio setup, and so it gives me a good opportunity to do that as well. So Streamlit is an open sourced an open sourced development framework essentially for Python. And so you can use that to build any applications that you so wish, really. And obviously, there's been a lot of activity in the large language model space, in the generative AI space, and Streamlit have done a summary, basically, over the last year, the last 12 months, that looks at the trends in large language models. So all of the people that have been building on Streamlit essentially have Streamlit have kind of did a bit of analysis to look at the top models used, the top kind of use cases and applications that have been developed, and it makes for pretty interesting reading. So I'm going to go through some of that in just a moment. And before I do that, if you are tuning in, listening to this, then I would encourage you to register for. There's two webinars coming up. One is on February the 7th and one is on February the 15th. The first one is with Servion, and I'm going to be talking there about the power and opportunity of AI in the contact center. Now, the contact center has the perfect kind of fit for AI because it is the use cases are there, the business appetite is there, the technology is ready, and there is consumer demand as well, and the real consumer problems that can be solved. So if you're interested in joining me to find out how contact centers can leverage AI safely, responsibly, and effectively, then you can go to vux.world/Servion to register for that webinar. That's vux.world/SERVION, Servion. And the other one is a webinar we're doing with Quick and Loop Insurance. Now, Quick have built a chatbot for Loop Insurance. And that chatbot is a generative AI chatbot. It's using large language models. It's using the Quick platform, and it is performing very, very well. And we're going to get under the hood to find out exactly how it's being built and the lessons that you can take into your work to find out how you can do this stuff yourself. We're going to be joined by Loop Insurance and Quick on that webinar, so you can go to vux.world/events if you want to register for that, and I encourage you to do so, February 15th. All right, so this report from Streamlit, the state of large language models. I'll put the link down onto on the in the comments down here, and there's some interesting reading here. So firstly, these are the kind of top sort of summary stats, right? So OpenAI is the most dominant language model used on this platform. 73% of use cases are using OpenAI. There's some interesting data around the other models that are being used or not being used, which I'll come on to in a minute. Also, the future is multi-agent. So apparently 55% of applications that are being built are using some form of orchestration as part of it, like a LangChain or something like that. And I'll get into a little bit more shortly about why those kind of tools are important, and also why LangChain isn't actually your only option for doing this kind of stuff. Another is that the most apps bypass vector databases. Therefore, most apps actually don't use retrieval augmented generation, which is also interesting, and we'll go on to a little bit more about that shortly. And finally, chatbots are on the rise. As you can see here, chatbots are on the rise. Now, I would have thought that most applications that are being built with large language models, although there's a huge amount of potential applications for large language models, for our concern at VUX World, we are concerned mainly with how businesses are leveraging these models and how enterprises can use this technology to really improve business operations and customer experience. And so it's no surprise for me, really, that chatbots are in a rising use case, should we say. Well, I won't go into the kind of number of people sort of like building on this platform. I think the most interesting stuff is when you look at things like the top models being used on Streamlit. Now, I mentioned there that OpenAI accounts for 73% of all applications that are being built on Streamlit using large language models are using OpenAI's APIs. That kind of doesn't surprise me, and it definitely resonates with a lot of the conversations and experiences that we've had with enterprises. I mean, a lot of them begin with OpenAI, and obviously Microsoft have been doing a tremendous job of integrating OpenAI's capabilities into all of its capabilities. And so if you're a Microsoft house, it's highly likely that you're going to experiment with OpenAI APIs first, and also given the general presence of OpenAI, the marketing that OpenAI have managed to achieve, and the recognition they've managed to achieve over the last 18 months or so has been absolutely tremendous. So it's no surprise that OpenAI is the model that people are gravitating to. However, an interesting part is that the second most used models is Hugging Face Hub. So that's open source, really. That's a lot of people experimenting with open source. And again, in the enterprise, the open source models are really interesting because those are the models that you can really customize, and also the models that you can bring and have in your own hosted environment, so you can make sure that they're more secure, you can make sure that no data is shared with any other organization, and you can customize them a lot more effectively. You can't really do that quite as much with OpenAI. So if you're a business and you want to explore large language models, then definitely looking at open source is a really good shout. But interestingly, you hear a lot about Cohere and you hear a lot about Anthropic, but look here at how often those models are actually being used, and it's very, very rare. So Cohere is the red line here, and Anthropic is the green line. So it's hardly any applications are using those capabilities, which I find very interesting, because especially, I think it might also tell us a little bit about the kind of people that are using Streamlit. I don't know whether or not it's going to be enterprises, because Cohere have all of Cohere's models really are built for the enterprise. They're business-based language models, and so I'd be surprised in the enterprise over time if it wasn't the case that Cohere took up more of a market share there. And also, when you think about large language model providers, you think about OpenAI, and Anthropic is really close behind. Obviously, it's raised a hell of a lot of money. It's got some really impressive models. It's got Claude, which is available similar to ChatGPT. So it's a consumer-facing application, and also the APIs that you can use behind the scenes. So I'm surprised that Anthropic isn't more used, to be totally honest. But there you go. Most people are using OpenAI, followed by some open source models. If we look at orchestration tools, inevitably, I think that you're going to see LangChain being the most used orchestration tool, which it is inevitably. The vast majority of applications that are built that use orchestration are using LangChain. Now, for developers, now again, I'm not a developer, so I'm not sort of, I'm not a developer basically. If you are a developer and you're looking at building on large language model based applications, then LangChain seems to be the place that people are gravitating towards. It's the hobbyist builders that are exploring this technology, kicking their tires, or those that are trying to build their own product and stuff like that. LangChain seems to be really heavily used. In the enterprise, you've got a lot more options than just LangChain, right? So you've got the big cloud providers, IBM obviously doing a lot of work on Watson and Watson X to integrate generative AI capabilities into that. And so if you're a business that uses IBM for your automation or your cloud, as many businesses do, then you're probably likely to look there for your orchestration capabilities. Google has the same capabilities with its CCAI capabilities, and with Vertex and Gemini, that's kind of just been released, although Gemini is not an orchestration tool as such, but it's got the Dialogflow capability, and within Dialogflow you can integrate large language models and you can manage context and memory and state and all that kind of stuff. And the same thing with Microsoft and Copilot that released that recently. So large enterprises that already have a preferred cloud of choice already have another way of orchestrating your large language model based apps. It's not necessarily that you have to go and use LangChain. Then you've got another tier underneath that, which I mentioned at the beginning here. We're doing a webinar with Quick. You've got the Quicks of the world, you've got the Core AIs of the world, the Cognigies, the OneReaches, the Boosts, the Razas, the Voice Flows. All of those kind of next tier down automation platforms all have the ability to orchestrate conversations. And so if you're a developer and you're playing around and you're kicking the tires, obviously LangChain is where the vast majority are gravitating to. If you're a business and you're an enterprise and you want to do the same kind of thing, manage memory, manage state, have more kind of coherent conversations that can kind of take somebody through an end-to-end transactional use case, then there's a lot more options that you can choose. However, it's not surprising to see that that LangChain is one of the most popular orchestration tools. Now, and also it's worth mentioning that a lot of these AI platforms I mentioned just there, they're all becoming orchestration tools in and of themselves. Not large language model automation tools, orchestration tools, but automation orchestration tools, if that makes sense. The vast majority of them are open platforms in a sense that you can use whatever large language models you choose, and it's not only orchestrating the LLM capabilities and generative capabilities, it's orchestrating an entire customer journey. And so every single enterprise that wants to automate anything is having conversations with customers, and they've got a back-end process that tags onto that. And so these other platforms give you the capability to be able to automate the entirety of a process rather than relying specifically just on large language models and memory, which many of these applications may well do. Vector retrieval augmented generation is a common use case, but not as common as I thought it would be. So here in this report, only 18% of all applications built on Streamlit are using some kind of retrieval augmented generation with a vector database. Now, if you follow me and all that kind of stuff, you'll already know what retrieval augmented generation is. You'll already know what a vector database is. But essentially, a vector database takes content, could be a knowledge base, could be any kind of information that your business has or your company has, and then it essentially encodes that knowledge into a vector database so that it can be searched more effectively. And a large language model will take an input from a user, encode that input, match it to what's being retrieved from the vector database, and then that content that's retrieved, it will either just regurgitate or it will summarize and generate a response for. And so that application is a really common application in enterprise, and that's where the vast majority of businesses have been looking to explore large language models and generative AI, because they've got banks and banks of data. And being able to use that data, have people interrogate that data and retrieve answers is a really good use case that you can leverage without too much of a lift. Although you have to say that it's not just as simple as uploading a bunch of data and it works. There's a lot of work you need to do with chunking of the data, and if you put shit data in, you're going to get shit responses out. And so you need to make sure the data is current, it's up to date. Ideally, it's been vetted and it's written in a way that, ideally for a business, you want to just regurgitate the information and steer clear somewhat of the generation points so far. But however, that's the kind of top use case for enterprises. In Streamlit, that's not necessarily a hugely common use case. It's only happening in 18% of cases. And so I don't know why that is. I mean, maybe search obviously is quite popular. If you look here, you've got Elasticsearch featuring on there, which obviously is a search-based kind of platform. And so maybe some of the use cases that people are looking at are search. There's also another practice that is emerging. We looked at, there's only 50% of applications using some kind of orchestration tools. There's a practice that's emerging, which is where people are trying to build large language model-based applications, but they're not using orchestration tools, yet they're trying to have multi-turn dialogues. So they're trying to have conversations with users that span multiple turns to end up with an end result, but they're not using any kind of orchestration. And what that ends up meaning is that you have an input from the user, which you send to a large language model to get a response from, and then that response that comes back, you will then send, when the next utterance comes in from the user, send the conversation so far back to the language model and have it respond. And what that means is that every time you send a prompt to a model, you're getting bigger and bigger and bigger because you're expanding the conversation. Without the orchestration, you're not really managing the state of the conversation. You're really just collecting dialogue and feeding the dialogue back into the model and hoping that every single prompt that you send, the model understands the dialogue and can then respond properly. So, and that is not a scalable solution whatsoever. You definitely want an independent place to manage memory, state, and context. You don't want to do that within the model itself. And so I've seen actually platforms that have been built that are using the method I've just described, which is taking a prompt from a user or utterance from a user, sending it straight to the model, getting a response from the model, response from the user, and you keep it on looping around the model with no independent context management, and it's a bad idea that's not very scalable. Maybe that's what some people are doing here, which is why only 18% of apps are using vector databases, potentially. I don't know. Another thing which is very interesting, especially for those of you that work in enterprise organizations, that chatbots are on the rise, which for me, I work with chatbots all day long, every day. VUX is a conversational AI company where we design and develop chatbots and voice assistants for various companies. So we work with this every day. For me, I live and dream this stuff all day and all night. And so it's obvious for me that chatbots are a really compelling, important and valuable use case. But it's growing as far as the kind of applications that independent developers, either hobbyist developers, are kind of are building as well. And so the use cases for search, single text input, which is more or less predominantly search-based use cases, are coming down, and use cases where we're using more multi-turn dialogue, conversational kind of use cases, chatbots, are going up. And so I think it ended up being that at the end of the year, at the end of December, 40% of use cases built on Streamlit are chatbots and 60% are search or single text input based. Now, that's not necessarily to say that that's not to say that this is applicable to everything, because inevitably this is just applications that are built on Streamlit. It's not a representation of what businesses are doing and the tools that businesses are using. It's not an accurate representation of what the whole community is doing and building. This is just specifically Streamlit. However, it's interesting to look at, and it may be that we can make some assumptions based on this data. Finally, the concerns that developers have when building with large language models are the following, which won't surprise you at all, because these are the same concerns that users have, and these are the same concerns that governments have as well, which is trust. Is the LLM response accurate? Trust and accuracy is a huge area of concern for anyone exploring large language models. There's things that you can do, and in the webinar with Quick and Loop, we're going to get into the specific details of how Quick has safeguarded and put guardrails around its application so that it reduces the chances of hallucination. I don't think we can ever say that hallucinations will be completely removed and off the table and squashed in its entirety, given the architecture of the way that these models are built. However, there are things and techniques that you can do to reduce the likelihood of hallucination, and we're going to get into that in a big load of detail on February the 15th. So trust is a concern. Another concern is privacy. So is your data safe, and the data that you're putting through these models, are they safe? And that's one of the reasons why enterprises are looking at more open sourced solutions, because you can pull that into your own environment and you can have all of your data completely contained and completely safe. It's another reason why Microsoft have got a really strong position, providing that you can find the settings within Microsoft that allow you to toggle the button which says that you don't share any data with OpenAI. So there's still a concern there. And also, I'm not saying that they would do this. However, is it really not going to be shared is a question. I mean, there was a big kind of scandal, wasn't there, with Alexa, if you remember, when it was sending data to the Philippines or something like that to be analysed, and it didn't necessarily say anywhere in its policy that it's going to happen like that, and there was a big kind of outrage, and people were not very happy. So privacy is a concern. Cost is also a concern. It's not cheap to use these models, certainly not cheap to use OpenAI at scale. And also, as these applications get more and more sophisticated, especially with enterprise applications getting more and more sophisticated, they're going to get more and more complex, and you're going to need to do a lot more API calls to various different models to make sure that you can assure the quality of the output. So there's something called chain of thought prompting with self-consistency, which is essentially where you send a prompt to a model, you get a response, you send that response to multiple models to validate whether or not it's an accurate response, and whether the consistency on the general kind of consensus that comes from those various models will lead you in a direction to say that if most of the models come back and say, yes, this is accurate, then it gives you the confidence that this is accurate response and you can send it back. So if you're doing stuff like that and you're doing multiple API calls at each interaction or each turn in the conversation, then it gets very expensive. And also, if you're operating at scale, if you're a large bank, if you're a large organization, you're going to be having lots and lots of interactions. You're going to consume a hell of a lot of resources, and it's not always cheap. Hobbyists will argue that it's super cheap because for one single API call or one kind of load of inference to get a response to a model, it's not going to break the bank. But if you're a large business and you're operating at scale and you've got multi-turn dialogues and you've got a lot of high stakes use cases where you do need to do a lot more quality assurance, you're gonna rack up your bills pretty quickly. And the last kind of concern is skills. So 17% of people that answered this respondents. There's only 980 respondents actually from the Streamlit community, but 17% of them said that they are concerned about lack of skills in doing this. And yes, there's a lack of skills. I would say that what's happening with large language models is that these things are becoming or are more developer-centric tools. And if you look at the way the enterprises has been developing conversational AI over the last 5 years or so, the ones that are doing it really well will have a team of designers, conversation designers, and they're responsible for creating the experience, designing the dialogues, and designing what the interaction ought to be like. There's also a team of people who will look at quality assurance, so they'll do all the measurements and the analytics and the iterative improvements. With large language models, there's obviously also developers in there who are actually building this stuff. But with large language models, as we've seen here, tools like LangChain and stuff like that, working with APIs, these are not always within the realms of designers. And you need to be able to code, and you need to be able to, work with APIs and stuff like that. And so, on the one hand, you've got developers who are entering this space who haven't designed a conversational interaction before, and you've got designers who have designed a conversational interaction plenty of times that now are slightly more excluded from the tool set. So you've got real inclusion from the tool set perspective, but potentially a lack of capabilities or skills in conversation design, and you've got skills in conversation design with a lack of access to the technology capability. That's why tools like the voice flows, the core AIs, and the Razas and all that kind of stuff, the Quicks of the world, that's why they're so important, because they bridge the gap between the creatives and the technical. You've got the designers on one hand that can create the experience, and the developers on the other hand that can build it. And so the more we can kind of bridge the gap between, the raw tools and interfaces that are easier to use for people with more creative skill sets, the better it will be. And so that's it, really. I think what I'll do is I'll put the links down here if you want to have a look at this in more detail. There's a few interactive elements that you can get on board with, and that is the state of large language model applications in 2023. And so what I'll do is I'll test this little music bed on the way out, and I'll put some ducking on there so that when I do talk, it goes a little bit quieter. And I will see you on the next one. Next week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a review of a paper that Katie McCann published or co-authored, looking at the risks involved in large language models and generative AI in the enterprise. There's 83 risks in total, and I've highlighted the top 10. And so next week, I'll go through that top 10. I will pick out what the top risks are. And hopefully there's some stuff in there as well around what you can do to mitigate that as well. So thank you for tuning in. Don't forget the Surveyon webinar on February the 7th and also the quick webinar on February the 15th, vux.world/Surveyon or vux.world/events. Or you can subscribe to vux.world/subscribe and you'll get all of the invites and everything that you need to join all of our events, all of our live podcasts, all of our live webinars, and all of these kind of videos and bits of content as well. So thank you both so much for joining me, and I'll see you very soon.